Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the schedule for the UCI Cyclocross World Cup of 2025-2026 season. We will refrain from any further comments on the calendar because the calendar is still very much in its early days. There will be a lot of races added and some of them will still be replaced. But for instance, the Coupe de France, HSF System Cups and also the Slovak Cup aren't on the calendar at all at the moment. So there wouldn't be much sense in talking about that right now. We'll save that for a later episode. Issam, thank you for being here to discuss what we do know for sure.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So as said, the schedule for the World Cup was released. It came out earlier during the Cyclocross World Championship weekend. For some reason there was one to be confirmed spot which got announced today. We're recording this on Friday the 7th of February, so there was a week delay there. We'll start the racing just like last year in late November. The 23rd of November we'll see the first round take place in Tabor, Czech Republic. The Classic returns on the circuit after hosting the World Championships. For sponsor and volunteer reasons, they were unable to do it back-to-back. It was a quite short turnover. Sponsors put in extra financial efforts, but they are back now, going to host their 17th World Cup. After that, we head to Flamanville on the 30th of November. The talk about a break week never really materialized. Cabras is up on the 7th of December. Then we hit the Belgian circuit. The 14th of December sees racing take place in Namur. And from there on, it's the Christmas phase. All racing in Belgium. The World Cup goes to Antwerp on the 20th. Kokzijde the day after. Boxing Day racing in Gavere. 2 days later, we hit Dendermonde. And then the Christmas period closes out on the 4th of January with racing in Zonhoven. After National Championship weekend, racing goes to Spain for the Benidorm World Cup, and we finish with the same double weekend as this year. Maasmechelen and Hoogerheide. The World Championships take place in Hulst, which is why Hulst isn't on the calendar. Other changes are that Dublin is gone. That race didn't make a return, whereas Besançon has been substituted for Flamanville. Issam, what are your thoughts on this schedule? I will, as a sort of disclaimer, say that this might sound familiar based on our previous discussions and the calendar discussion we had in May of last year. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this schedule, which is pretty much a copy from last year, really?
Yeah, it is. You can really see the continuation in some of the races that are still in it. It's, Tabor, it's great to see it back. It was close to being certain that it would return again, and thankfully they are able to return. Hulst is out because of the World Championships, obviously, but there is not really that step that we were, I wouldn't say expecting, but hoping for in a way. Last year we were discussing somewhat that we hoped for maybe new venues, maybe something in Great Britain or at least something in that regard, and that clearly didn't happen. Germany also not really up for debate. The same goes for Switzerland. Those are all countries that, not really mentioned at all, and we kind of sticking with the races that we had before. Kokzijde was, before it was rumored, for me a little bit of a surprise. But it also kind of makes sense because it comes after Antwerp. And I think that it is almost unrealistic to go from Antwerp to a venue that is outside of Belgium or very far away. I think that with transfer, it's going to be a pain for the riders and teams. So Kokzijde in that regard makes sense. Yeah, I think everything that we didn't really want to see in a World Cup happened again. And it is, we slowly but surely are looking into the dire situation that we are in, and you're kind of figuring out, is this ever going to get better? I think that the ambitions that Flanders Classics had and what we are getting right now, it's definitely not adding up, and I think it's, for me, the way I look at it is a disappointment.
Kokzijde coming in is perhaps indeed somewhat of a surprise. The race left the circuit because they wanted more control over it. However, in the Kokzijde podcast of this year, I said it's quite sad to see what this race has come to. We all know the famous images of the World Championships when there were nearly 60,000 people there on one day to watch Niels Albert become world champion. I think that's the best attended World Championship ever, but there have been many great attended World Championships in Belgium. They're now back in. I do kind of think it's a one-off, considering the fact that Hulst will likely return if they don't bankrupt on the World Championships. And that's also why I don't really want to overreact. Yes, Koksijde coming on means there's 7 races in Belgium. Yes, that's a violation of UCI rules, but we know that the UCI rules are as useful as toilet paper. Well, actually, never mind. That's a bad analogy because toilet paper is quite useful, but the UCI regs are useful to use as toilet paper is perhaps what I should have said, because they often mean nothing. This isn't the first time that any of these rules here have been violated. In the end, what does it matter, Issam? We take out Koksijde, or Koksijde comes in, and we take out Hulst. Hulst is a Dutch race at 5 kilometers from the Belgian border. The eventual conclusion kind of stays the same, right? Where last year we hoped, hey, this is maybe a step backwards so we can do 2 steps ahead, which is what Valens Classics had kind of promised us. They kept telling us, well, there's these interesting venues we can go to. It's now pretty much a stagnation. That's kind of how I see it. Hulst or Koksijde, it doesn't really matter if you're in Belgium or in a part of the Netherlands which literally has Flanders in its name.
I agree with that. I think that Koksijde is definitely a venue that has historic value in a sense, and it is a race that is different from the others. It's not really a race that you often see on the calendar. The type of race in the dunes with the sand, it's special. But another thing that really should be mentioned in a way is obviously the loss of Dublin, which I think we gave that some attention when we were discussing the Dublin race. It was up in the air. There were some rumors, there were some things going on, there were some question marks on what is going to happen with Dublin next year. I can remember that Van de Spiegel was also saying that it's barely doable at the time, and I think that it shows now that it's not on the calendar, and it means I don't think that, it's going to be hard probably for that race to return. And it's sad because Dublin was sort of the race that you had on the calendar in which you could say, oh, okay, it's not Great Britain, but at least it is somewhere in the region and it is there, and there is maybe this interest that can come out of that, and maybe later on we can maybe keep that race in Dublin and also have a race in Great Britain. But with the loss of Dublin, and it's not really the case because it could still happen, but it almost feels for me that with the loss of that race, the idea and the probability of a race in Great Britain, it's kind of gone for a World Cup. It's still there maybe, but I think there needs to be a hell of a lot of effort being put in to make such a race happen, because currently I don't really see it come into action and actually be a race on the calendar of the World Cup.
The rumors around a British World Cup have completely dried up, and we can touch upon the international state and what does it mean that Dublin, which was really one of a few cornerstones of the renewed World Cup, which they could be proud about and really showcase, hey, look, we've done this, those have been gone. But first, before we talk about the future and some potential, let's focus on a few more critique points of this calendar, which ties into why Dublin is gone. Dublin did 3 editions. They were supposed to be in the very first edition of the reformed World Cup. They got cancelled due to COVID, sat out the next year, then made a return. I can see this race come back. The organisers there on the Sport Ireland campus, they know what they're doing. It was hard to convince them to do it this year, but perhaps if they take a year or 2 off, they can kind of repack themselves, get the fans to realize what they're missing, and then rejoin the circuit. I do see that as a possibility. But what was at the core of the reason that they couldn't come back this year, why they didn't want to come back, why they were already in serious doubt if they should have put on an event for this year, the public attendance dipped. In the first year, Van Aert was there, Pidcock was there. Yes, the start fields were small. At least there were a few poster boys there, a few riders that drew in the crowds. The second edition had very, very dire attendance. This year it was still not great. It was perhaps a bit busier than the year before, but also because the venue is super stretched out, it appears super empty. That's why they're out. And again, this is a repeat of the podcast we recorded last year. This critique is not new coming from my mouth, but time after time again, the non-Belgian Dutch World Cups get the shittiest dates. It's the same now. It's Tabor, Flamanville, Cabras. Yes, they're all protected weekends. Yes, there's no races in Belgium. And yes, Tabor will most likely be attended quite well. But then afterwards, we hit Flamanville, we hit Cabras, and we saw it this year already. Cabras got cancelled, but a majority of the riders said, I'm not going, I'm in Spain. Several riders skipped Dublin because they were in Spain. It's again that phase in the season. So to see these talks about an empty weekend, which I think would be quite a good option for the World Cup, to see those talks collapse, it's painful because I know exactly what's going to happen. It's again going to be the races in Flamanville and Cabras that suffer for the start fields. That in a result brings in fewer spectators, which then makes these organizers question, hey, why are we doing this? It's super expensive. It's hard for us to come in. Tabor Flamanville is a heck of a transfer. That's a 15-hour drive. It's nice if you're Belgian or Dutch and you can kind of go home in between in the middle. But if you're a rider from elsewhere, like from Canada or from the US or whatever, looking at this logistical schedule, Tabor, Flamanville, Cabras, it's again, they stack the travel together, making it less appealing to riders to do it, and in fact then hampering the organizers because of some of them will say, well, that's too much money, I'm not going to do it.
That can discourage potential candidates that want to organize a race, and I think that is maybe something that has to be looked into. It has to be more. There has to be more to gain for a complete outsider in a way, in terms of organization. An organization that is not really familiar with cyclocross but wants to organize a race and maybe has experience or can have that experience from other organizers, but financially maybe they have the money ready. But it's just a risk, and it's, as you say, you're not really sure if you're going to get the dates that you want to have, which are arguably in that Christmas period. And as you say, right now, it's, in the Christmas period, it's all the Belgium races that have the best dates in a way. And it's not only the Christmas period, it's also, as you say, it's just that moment in which most of the riders are thinking about having that week or 2 weeks in Spain just to have the legs ready for the training for the Christmas period. And it's tricky and it's difficult as well because you want to see the change. And I honestly think, and I may be a bit naive, but I honestly think that within Flanders Classics there is the idea of changing it up. But it's time and time again you kind of get the door slammed in your face. It's every time, we Hulst is gone, we have to find another race, we put Kokseij in, and guess what, Dendermonde and Maasmechelen, who kind of started as a replacement race that we just had to, fill in the calendar. Oh, guess what, we had a sort of a deal of 5 years or 3 years, and we're gonna stick around with those, and it's actually great, we should maybe keep those races in. And then the races that were already somewhat in the World Cup, they stay, and there is not really that fresh air that we were hoping for, and the ideas of internationalization. Maybe the sport isn't big enough for what we are wanting to have, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's reasonable to ask from Flanders Classics, and it's reasonable. I think it's within reason to find countries that are wanting to organize a World Cup, but for some reason we are in a situation right now that we're not really able to do so. And I think part of it definitely has to do with that high entry fee and the risk that you have to take.
We're not asking for much, Issam. That's where you're right. We're not asking for them to come up, hey, next year we want the schedule with a round in India, Johannesburg, Melbourne, give us the US and Canada, give us everything. That's not what we're asking. The fee is high, but we've also seen countries that are capable of finding organizers that make a profit on their event even with a fee. Flamanville, it's a disgrace that they weren't in this year's calendar. This year's calendar was not international at all. Flamanville put in a bid, and unlike all the other venues that didn't make it, that was Waterloo, that was Val d'Isle who didn't bid, Flamanville put in a bid. The year before they had an operating budget of roughly €1 million. That's a ton of money. They put on a World Cup and then a Coupe de France weekend. It wasn't a great success for them. Not only didn't they get the World Cup attendance they wanted, they also realized that 2 weekends in a row with all the staff, and their venue was just too expensive. That's why they're cutting back. But this is a venue that should be encouraged to host the World Championships. Flamanville has been, I would argue, largely successful. We've seen World Cups in Troyes, we've seen the European Championships in Pontchâteau, we've seen the World Cup in Besançon, and most recently we've seen the World Championships in Louvain. All these French races have had solid attendances on solid courses and would be a great addition. France should 100% have a second World Cup on this schedule. We should be looking into going to the north of Spain. We should be looking into going to the UK. We should be looking into going into Hungary. And not all of that needs to be materialized in 1 year. It can be step by step, one venue at a time, maybe 2 venues, maybe 1 year nothing changes. But now it's gone backwards compared to the introduction of some new rounds. The rumors about the future have completely dried up. We're simply asking them to walk their talk. If they give interviews saying, oh, we have so many bids, we have so many options, we're going to work on this, we're going to make this work, we're going to go to other countries, revitalize the sport in core regions, then walk your talk, make it work. Don't come up with all these reasons why it didn't happen. We've reformed 5 seasons ago. It just seems that they're, to a large extent, also just ignoring the critique. It's not that they're doing anything about these licensing fees. Even more, the points I just raised about the extensive back-to-back-to-back travel is being concerns raised by teams. The fact that they're racing when everybody is training is not new. Everybody should know that if you follow the sport. It's been going on for at least 20 years. And then there's also just the point of the national federations. They this year said this Dublin trip makes no sense. You're putting one World Cup. It's very expensive for the federations. Why don't you just move this one to Christmas? And what have they done now? They've gotten away from the Youth World Cups 1 in November. They've made it 2, but they made it Tabor and Flamanville. You're again not encouraging your federations to send lots of their talents, because that's a super expensive double trip to do. Tabor is on one side of our continent and Flamanville on the total other side. That's without traffic at Paris, which I don't know if you've ever seen the Ring of Paris not jammed up. A 15-hour drive. It's a 17-hour drive, so that's a proper 2-day journey to make that trip. That's a big ask for the federations which don't have the money. It would make much more sense to put those races in places closer together. But again, they don't really seem to be listening to that critique, because I have heard that critique being voiced by federations last year when they put Troyes and Dublin back to back, which was arguably an easier transfer to make than this.
It's a shame that they don't take the critique seriously, or at least they're not aware of it, or they haven't picked it up yet. I don't know what it is, but it's a shame, because I feel that the national federations, the riders, the teams should be part of the solution, because I think that not all of them, because let's be honest, I mean, we have heard the Belgium top riders and then also the Dutch, they have complained at times about transfers from Belgium to France in a weekend, or the critique has been there as well. And I think that in terms of the way they are looking at the sport should also change a little bit. I think it's a bit of a give and take situation in which the riders also should be open for change, and it's not always going to be the most beneficial for you in terms of the finance. But I think that eventually you will gain more from it, because the sport will grow to an extent in which there will be more money, it will be financially better, and it could be more sustainable in the future as well. It's right now, it feels like Flanders Classics is just like acting as a sort of a captain that's on a sinking ship, and they are, they're careless. They don't care what's going on. The ship is sinking. Doesn't matter. We just continue to go to our course, and whatever happens. If you're not going to make it, we're not going to make it. And I guess that's how I feel about Flanders Classics, and the way they're blindly following this whole idea of everything in Belgium is great. We should keep doing what we're doing. And lastly, it seems like that they are kind of hoping on this push from the Olympics, which I think we're going to talk maybe a little bit about that and what the effects could be. But it seems like they are really wanting to push that and think that will change the whole scenario, because last year I can remember Van der Spiegel talking about this and really trying to give this idea that there are a lot of candidates that are waiting, that are sitting it out, that are not really risking it right now, but they're waiting for the sport to become an Olympic event, and maybe after that they would then be able to take the risk and put the money in to organize a cyclocross race. But I don't think that's really feasible. I think that the interest would be bigger for sure, but what do you think about that? And maybe you want to talk about something else, I don't know.
The orchestra is playing, but the Titanic is going down, is what you're alluding to. While there have been some complaints in Belgium about transfers to Dublin and Troyes in one weekend, this year that kind of disappeared, right? Because they now didn't need to double up those Belgian weekends. Well, in Belgium, there's still definitely a large extent of privilege among these riders. For instance, why do we need to go to Pontevedra for the European Championships when the Koppenberg is there? I would say that we should not forget that Belgium is the core of the sport. And while we both are quite critical of this schedule, we are not saying that the sport should completely turn its back on Belgium. Belgium is where most money can be made. It's at the moment the only country where it's feasible to have a career as a full-time cyclocross rider. It's essential to the future of the sport, absolutely. However, should a World Cup have 7 out of its 12 races take place in one country, it's against the rules because it's not much of a World Cup. There should be a couple of fewer World Cups in Belgium. The World Cup should be used to move elsewhere, because that's a way that, while I don't know how direct the effect will be, it definitely at least showcases something. And again, France, where there has been the success, should also have a second World Cup over a 7th World Cup in Belgium. I think that sums it up quite well, so people don't get the impression that we want the sport to completely move out of Belgium. We're just saying a World Cup should at least be more spread out over the European continent. We're not going to get into a North American or no North American point. Then, to your point, Issam, you alluded to a number of things regarding the attitude of Flanders Classics. Let's go a step back, right, before we come to your point about the Olympics. I ask you this. Before Flanders Classics took over the World Cup, this is what the schedule looked like in 2019-2020. There were 9 rounds of the Cyclocross World Cup. We started with 2 rounds in North America, Waterloo and Iowa. After that, we hit the European scene. Switzerland, Bern. Czech Republic, Tabor. Then we had 3 Belgian races, then we had Nome, and then we had Hogerheide. If we look at where we are now, we have 12 races. Bern has been replaced by Benidorm. Tabor is still Tabor. Nome is being replaced by another French race, but not really a big pimp up. The 2 North American races have gone. And what have we gotten in return? A bunch of Belgian races, and then Cabras. After 5 years into this reform, when we've had the second reform, which meant that the calendar now, instead of starting in September, means that we're starting the season with the World Cup in the middle of November, how much do you actually view that this reform has done for the sport?
I think that if you look at it in that perspective, for sure, you could make the case that not much has changed. But I would argue that there have been some positives in these couple of years that we had with Flanders Classics. I think that a race in Val di Sole, for sure, for me was a highlight in terms of what Flanders Classics was pushing for. It also kind of shows then the failure of Flanders Classics for not being able to hold that race. But that's something else. But I feel that Benidorm, for sure, you could see it as a replacement in a way for Bern, but I feel that, that's more a Switzerland issue other than Flanders Classics, I would say, because it's not only the fault of Flanders Classics that they're not able and not capable of organizing races in Switzerland. I think that Switzerland themselves, are not really at the moment the country where you can organize a World Cup. And that's a real shame, because I think that would definitely be something that I would like to see. But I feel that a race like Benidorm is, in my opinion, an idea which I can only praise Flanders Classics for. And I think that is definitely one of the things that I we can only be positive about the way they brought it to the calendar. They gave it a date in which they always know that it can be successful, and it kind of shows that if Flanders Classics is behind an idea, that it can work, and that they really think about it for the long term as well, and that they really want to protect that race. It's just that sometimes you look at it and you're like, geez, could they have not been more supportive to other races the way they have been for Benidorm? Or that it would be something that I would have loved to see. And I think that if they would be able to really put in the work that they have put in Benidorm, and the thought as well, thinking a little bit outside of the box. Look, the riders are going to be in a training camp in Spain. Could we maybe bring the race somewhat closer to them? And, we can also then in that point also organize a race again in Spain. And I think those kind of ideas are the things that you have to do. And I'm not gonna be that guy to say, they have not gone anywhere, Flanders Classics, in the last 5 years. But I feel that there are definitely positives in this 5 years, but it just feels that despite the positives, we are still somewhat in the same place. And there is not really that progress that we wanted to see, despite all the positives that we had around it. It's not significant enough to say, look, they made a huge positive impact on the sport and on the World Cup, and look where they are now. I think that in that case, you can definitely say that that didn't happen. And we kind of have to hope that one day it will not only stay with those positive things that Flanders Classics at times show, but that we can really see some significant changes in the calendar and also in the attitude of Flanders Classics and the calendar as a whole.
There are a few aspects to this story. First of all, taking 2019-2020 as base year is a bit cruel of me. If we look, for instance, at the 2014-2015 season, the World Cup only had 6 races, from which 3 were in Belgium and 2 were in the Netherlands. The only non-Dutch-Belgian round was Milton Keynes. That was heavily criticized, so the year after the UCI expanded a little bit, we went back to France and Cross Vegas got added. With Cross Vegas, there was definitely a big boost. There was, for a few years, this sentiment that the American scene would kind of open doors for cyclocross. Iowa got added in 2016, but in that 2016-17 season, if you look at the state on continental Europe, it was quite dire. Because of the criticism, the UCI added a few races, but they were grasping. The World Cup in Zeven, Germany got added. The prize money from the second edition has never been paid. They went to Fiuggi in Italy. That's one of the silliest World Cups I've ever seen. If you compare it to those years, cyclocross is definitely on the rise a bit in terms of international appeal. And all of that story is tied into hope, where in this period there was the hope of, hey, the North American scene. At some point, the Montreal World Cup was also announced on the provisional schedule, but the UCI completely fumbled that one. Now we've also had that. And that's probably, Issam, where most of my frustration comes from. And maybe I've been naive, but Flanders Classics has been telling us for a long time that they were going to revitalize cyclocross. They were going to return to these core regions of cyclocross. After the World Championships in Hoogheide, they were talking even bigger. South Africa, New York, Chicago, Hong Kong, Johannesburg, everywhere. The sky was the limit. But their words don't match their actions. They haven't been able to revitalize core regions. They can claim some successes, but that's what I alluded to earlier. After their cancelled COVID edition, the year after with the 16 races, they could present something. Hey, we have 3 American races. The year after, they could announce, we're bringing back Dublin. The year after, they could announce, hey, we're going to Benidorm. We have Val di Sole. It was step by step, actually slowly but surely doing what they promised. But then it stagnated, and those steps forward went backwards. We're kind of in the same situation as we were prior to the reforms we just concluded. But their words are still the same. And this is what you alluded to. Thomas van der Spiegel, the CEO of Flanders Classics, gave an interview to Belgian paper Het Laatste Nieuws last year, saying, he's being asked this question. In an interview 2 years ago, you were very ambitious about the new World Cup locations. New York, Africa, South America and Hyde Park in London. For now, Sardinia is still the most exotic venue. Conversations with those venues are still ongoing. There are some slopes that we could already close, but I don't know if we would be doing cyclocross a favor with that. There is still interest from other continents, and I especially expect a push in March, because if it's true and I can believe the rumors, cyclocross would become Olympic from 2030 onwards. That will free up new budgets for cross in other countries. We are completely ready to shift up gear in the upcoming years. Cyclocross is the most underutilized cycling product to this day. No cycling sport is remotely close to cyclocross in terms of TV product, both for sponsors and in-person spectators. It has global potential. Of the best riders in the world, quite a lot came through the cross. We need a game changer to keep them, and that could perhaps be the Olympic. This is, again, Issam, a bit of why it feels like a disappointment, because they were talking. They said in the media, Glasgow, after the Super Worlds, they were disappointed there was no cyclocross there, so they wanted to do a World Cup. We were in talks with them. These talks about London, even announcing it in the UCI president's newsletter, it never materialized. Those are the disappointments. And still here, but we're ready to shift up gears. I'm getting a bit impatient, and maybe that's me and I need to be more patient, but that's at least how I feel about these quotes.
You need to be more patient. 5 years. No, but I think that the issue with these quotes is that it's not the first time that we have heard them. At least, sure, not the same things have been said before, right? And I think that when they were talking about Johannesburg and Hong Kong, I think when someone does that with no shame, he needs to have a good look at himself in a mirror, because I think that is pure delusion in a way, if you would quote. And especially, it was on a high. I can definitely understand it. It was on a high. We had that World Championships in Hogerheide. We were so ecstatic, and we were saying that cyclocross is alive and well and kicking, and it's only going to grow from here. And it was, we talked about it back then, and we were saying that it was delusion of the highest order. And I think with these quotes, it's so hard to see the perspective, because sure, it sounds like they are now somewhat counting on this Olympic nomination, and when it becomes Olympic, then we can push for other venues outside of this scope that we are looking right now. And there are multiple locations that are maybe looking into getting into a World Cup and organizing an event, but they are just right now not really wanting to step in, because, as I alluded, the risks that are in it as well. I don't know how much of a role that will play, and it feels to me like it's also for them just a bit of guessing what they're doing and just trying to have a story in case it doesn't work out, and then maybe they can change the story again. And it's not something that I can hold on to and say, look, they're really going to do it now. I have full trust in them. I can trust them fully. We have been mucked off. If you look at the calendar and you compare it to how they started and where they wanted to go, and you look at it right now, in that regard, the progress hasn't been made the way we wanted it to be. And I don't think, if we don't see that progress in the next 2 years, I don't think we ever will see it, to be honest. I'm gonna be quite honest about it. I think that if in the next 2 years we don't see something, we don't hear something, we don't hear about a potential race in Switzerland, or maybe a second race in Spain, or two races in France, and if we don't hear that, I don't know when it's going to happen, to be honest. I think then at that point, maybe Flanders Classics is going to be tired as well. Who knows? It's hard. It's tough. The Olympics could change things, but to what extent? That's maybe my question. Maybe you know a bit more. Maybe you can discuss that part a little bit more.
My perspective is that Olympics will be a game changer. They, here in Belgium and the Netherlands, often think, well, what will it do? I think it will do quite a lot. It's sometimes hard for non-Dutch and Belgian people to grasp how big the sport is here, and it's sometimes quite hard for Belgians and Dutch people to understand how dire the situation is as a cyclocross rider or race organizer outside of this region. I don't want to sound arrogant like I'm the only person who understands that. I know there are several other people who do as well. But I'm definitely, together with you, Issam, in a bit of a unique situation where we're Dutch. We read the Belgian papers, we watch the Belgian broadcasts, but through the Instagram, our contact is primarily with riders, coaches, national coaches, race organizers, team managers from non-Dutch Belgian countries, which I feel gives us a better insight into the situation in those countries than the Dutch and Belgian media get, who have a way better insight to what's going on inside the teams here, because that's where they focus their time and resources on, and that makes complete sense. I do think it will be a game changer. So federations will receive money from the Olympic Committee only if this is added to the permanent program, which is a big if. If it's a one-off, it will be fun for the riders, but change nothing in the grand scheme of things. We need to hope that Koo or Lapartien get elected. Never thought I would be rooting for Lapartien in an election, but here we are. If they get elected IOC president, there's a good chance that cyclocross does get added to the permanent program. I think it should be added. Then there will be sponsors and bike manufacturers flowing back in, seeking the publicity. It would be good. I do think that would change. But would it add more World Cups? That's where I'm a little bit skeptical. In the long run, I do think it would, but a surge, I don't know. It's hard to see the first thing that these federations think, oh, we need a World Cup to develop our riders. I think they are going to be talking more, well, we need to financially support our U23s to get them to race the biggest races more. We need to think about filling our junior squads instead of only sending 3 riders because that's all the budget we have for. And perhaps what they also start doing, like they do in other sports, is fund their elite riders because that's a solid medal opportunity they have. That's kind of the order in which I see these things going, Issam.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's for us hard to guess what the effect will be on the calendar if and when it becomes Olympic. I think that will be the hardest thing to predict. I think that, as you say, for the riders and the national federations, some countries can really gain from that Olympic status in a way, at least for that, that the 4 years, the 5 years that they will have going towards the Olympic Games. I think that will be huge for some federations, for some countries. I think that the risk will still be there, right? The Flanders Classics is probably not going to change their attitude towards the foreign races. When they come in, it will be like, oh, well, these dates are already taken, and guess what? We have something in November. We have maybe something just that first week of December. We have maybe something, and they would then try to do something, but I guess it doesn't work. For that risk is just too high for the countries, or at least for foreign organizations to step in. And I don't think that the Olympics will take that completely away. At times I think about the sport and the World Cup. Is it not only an issue of Flanders Classics and the UCI and all that, but it is also an issue of the sport in general? Is the sport not too small? We look at the broadcast, nothing has changed over the last 20 years. If I take a broadcast from 2015, 2020, 12 maybe even, I will look at the broadcast. Sure, the cameras could have been were maybe a little bit better. The quality has been going up a little bit, but in terms of how it is broadcasted, there is not really much change in that regard. And I think that if you look in any other sport, you can see that there are some changes in, with football, it's before the matches and after, and all the graphics that are being done right now. And I think that with cyclocross, it feels like the sport, it's not only the calendar and that whole thing around it, but it just feels that the sport as a whole didn't really evolve. And I think that there is also a lot of growth that could be unpacked, and that is also something to be looking at. And I think that that could be something that Flanders Classics could also take initiative in. I think with the World Cup you have all the ingredients to make something big out of it. I think that it's a shame that the English broadcasters don't have someone in the field when they have a broadcast to help the commentators in a way. While in mountain bike, if you look at that, they have that aspect in a way. I don't know, I cannot really remember if it's also in the live broadcast, but at least before they have the previews, they have all these things that are around it. And in cyclocross, you don't really have that. It's straight into the race, and then after the race, you can go on with your day. And I think those are just things that you see that I think could change. I think that there needs to be a some fresh wind. It needs to change. And maybe that is me thinking that the sport is bigger than it is. But I feel that the product in itself, if it would change a little bit, if it would get better, maybe that could also help in maybe being more attractive to other organizers stepping into the sport and taking that risk because of how the project has evolved and how it has been more modern and up to standard with modern time.
One thing I will say and will give Flanders Classics credit for, Issam, is that in the World Cup, if you look at a broadcast from many years ago, there have been quite some changes. I do think that you're right in terms of graphics and things. There's definitely a lot that can be improved. The split screen is something, or the picture-in-picture is something that should be utilized more also on the road. When riders move through the fields, they should just put on, just like in F1, these lap time comparisons, move with bars, all very interesting things to do. But the World Cup has revolutionized for cyclocross standards the way advertising is done. The number of LED screens, LED barriers, the LED arches at the start-finish straight, this is definitely an increase in sponsor visibility and potential money flowing into the sport compared to what we still see at the more traditional X2O races. Sure, still improvement can be made, but that's something I will give them credit for. To your second point, is cyclocross too small of a sport? Well, we can't kid ourselves. It is a niche sport because it's a niche discipline within a niche sport. Cycling itself is not as big as it used to be anymore. It's not a small sport, but it's a mid-sized sport. It's a sport that's ranked roughly around 15th biggest sport in the world in terms of viewership. I don't have the knowledge present at the moment to really discuss the effects that it could have for cyclocross to be free to air, and the whole problem within the UK, you need a super expensive subscription to watch cyclocross. That's definitely not going to help the visibility of the sport in the UK, but I don't really have any numbers or data to back up what I'm going to say, so I'm going to refrain from that. I don't think it's too niche to join the Olympics necessarily, because most winter sports are niche. Most winter sports are not super international. Definitely this year's World Championship top 10 is not going to help me prove my point, but the ones of the past two editions I feel would. We could definitely see a Olympics. Yes, the Dutch and the Belgians will dominate, but at the end of the day, if I watch lunge or if I watch bobsled, all I see are Germans going down this super scary track at crazy speeds, and they always come at the top step of the podium. They always dominate there as well, often taking a 1-2. So yeah, I do think that cyclocross could be a fit there. Other things can be improved, yes, but again, there are regions where there is potential at the moment. You can work on growing the potential elsewhere, but if you remember, and I don't blame you if you don't, because this is years ago by now, when those stories about the Johannesburg and Hong Kong World Cups came, we were critical of that. We're not asking for that. In this current system, I do see potential for a North American round, but at the same time, I also think it's okay that we don't go there. With such a compressed schedule, I can see that maybe it makes more sense to first focus on the European mainland. But that's what we're asking for. We're asking to slowly make progress like you've promised elsewhere, not necessarily go all in on Melbourne, and those windows have passed. You bottled the opportunity for Melbourne, which offered to pay for a number of riders to come and race there. You butchered the opportunity of going to Montreal because you weren't flexible with your dates when it didn't work out with the marathon. Those are long gone opportunities. If you don't take these opportunities, you don't take your chances at the races, they go. That's why I was so scared that they turned down Flamanville last year could eventually result in the end of that race. Thankfully, it didn't. But that's where we're focusing on primarily, I feel, is it comes down to this. There are regions in Europe that have potential. You've been telling us that you're working on it, but at the end of the day, all you show us is that you go more to Belgium with the World Cup, whilst 2 years ago you were on the warpath. You were saying there's no place in Belgium for the X2O Trophy and Super Prestige, but we're not going to stop organizing the Super Prestige, de facto putting a bomb under the X2O Trophy. That's contradicting. It doesn't add up. And then at the essence of this is this will probably be my final point, principal agent problem. The UCI wants the World Cup to create more global coverage and attention for cyclocross. Flanders Classics, well, what do they want? At the end of the day, they're a sports organizing firm. They want to make money. They have shareholders. They want, at the end of the day, that those numbers at the end of the year are green. That's what they want. Most money, cash cow season in Belgium around Christmas. I don't really think it's a coincidence that we're heading there with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 World Cups. That's nearly half of the schedule taking place there in pretty much no time, where there's the most spectators, the most possibilities to see the big names at work. You can definitely argue that they're shortening the period has helped, especially on the women's side, getting riders to take the classification more serious. That's not something I'm per se against, but again, it's contradicting. Flanders Classics, less in Belgium, moves the World Cup there more, and their goal is different than the one of their principle. They want, at the end of the day, to make more money, to return that heavy investment fee, to, I've said it a few times now, just have green numbers at the end of the year.
That is maybe something that has to be looked at. I think from UCI's standpoint, they have to look into the eyeballs, and they have to look into the progress that has been made with Flanders Classics. Has that been established? And is there maybe another candidate that could take it over and better in that regard? And as you say, it is difficult because you have this sort of, on the one side, you obviously want the sport to grow, as UCI probably, they want to see the sport grow and they want to see more attention in that regard. And on the other hand, you obviously have this whole financial aspect. And I think that in the end, maybe a solution for Flanders Classic could be if they bring in a title sponsor in that regard, that maybe would focus a little bit more on trying to get their money back in that regard and make it a better presence on the social media, or at least be innovative to that extent, and with the graphics and all that. I think that maybe that could be a solution in which we are somewhat looking for, and that could change things, but it's difficult right now. I think with, realistic scenario that we have right now is that probably Flanders Classics will stay. At least they will sit out their contract, and we will see after that what will happen. We basically have to hope that Flanders Classics is going to take some measures and only grow from here. And this year's calendar has been a disappointment, I guess. Last year was also somewhat of a disappointment, but we were a bit more hopeful. This year there are some scenarios which could play out and could be resulting in a hopeful future, but those are scenarios in which you are going to speculate and you have to hope that things work out that way. And I think that there has to be more initiative from Flanders Classics themselves. If they show that would be better, and then from there on we have to see where the sport will go and if it will grow, and if we will see that also resulting in a better World Cup calendar and a sport as a whole growing to a bright future.
More money would make everything easy. I, however, don't think it's easy to find a title sponsor that would just throw, I don't know the exact number, but somewhere between 500,000 and €1 million at it. Cyclocross is relatively good value for money sponsoring, but then again, mainly for Belgian firms. The viewership in Belgium is great. Cyclocross is watched a lot, really a lot. It's watched more than a bunch of road racing, partially because it's in the winter and more people sit behind their TV. It's just perfect for Belgians. So at the end of the day, if they can find a big sponsor that is willing to put on the big money, nice, but how realistic is that? I don't know, and I also don't necessarily blame them for not being able to land a big title sponsor. It's just, in general, a question: will the Olympics provide the game changer? How can we get more teams to encourage their riders to do cyclocross? There's talks about next year, when the point cycle restarts, that the points scored in cyclocross will count towards the World Tour promotion and degradation ranking. That could definitely be an incentive for teams that are in dire need of points to fill in a couple of cyclocross riders. That's an interesting thought. I don't know how fair it is or how it all would work out, but it would for sure boost cyclocross. It is a small sport, which is my point why it's hard to attract a large title sponsor. But as the UCI, I would start treating cycling as a year-round product and making sure that the left hand knows what the right foot is doing when they're going to take the penalty. They have cycling, they have mountain biking, and then they have track, and they have cyclocross. They have a year-round product, but they should start treating it as a year-round product, prioritizing year-round visibility of the sport in various different ways. So the international situation isn't great. The more I think about it, the more I also think it's kind of stagnated. It's not that much worse than 10 years ago. And it's mainly the hope that I had that everything would change that kind of makes me think, yeah, it's going real downhill now. Also with a couple of retirement announcements that came through now. But it's actually not that different, which we concluded from that time period that we only had the Milton Keynes World Cup, or the time that we didn't have any real World Cups to go to, so we just went to Zaven and Fuji and hoped anything it sticked, even if there was no money. So it's probably not really declining, but why is this important? Because for the sport to survive, to be taken serious, to be anything else than just a marginalized product of a few months, mainly around Belgium, the sport needs to mature, it needs to grow again, it needs to grow. It just needs to grow. And with that, I do agree with Van der Spiegel. It is a great product. It's fantastic to watch. It's fantastic to attend in person. There is great potential. Everything road cycling is criticized for is what cyclocross already has. The question is, where does it go from here? So fingers crossed Issam, that it improves in the coming years. I don't know if you want to share any closing remarks with our listeners.
It's not the end of the world, eh? I think that is probably a good way to end it. We have to be positive in the end, and I think that would it be a sport I'm not going to watch if it stays the same for the next 5 years? I will be watching. I will still be looking at it. I will still have that same love and passion that I had before, but I think it's sometimes painful to see certain elements of the sport and see that you just, as Van der Spiegel said, the potential is there. The product is amazing, and the potential that you can unpack it's insane in a way if you think about it. But we haven't figured it out yet. It's a very hard puzzle to solve, and I think that it needs great attention, and that attention at times is not given. Hopefully, that will be given, and we can only await what is ahead of us, and we will see. I guess at the end of it, the sport continues. We will be always there, and we'll see what comes out of it in the end.
Well, if we'll always be there, I don't know. If we're getting too old, we'll need to give the podcast to our children or something. Else they would only be listening to Unk takes on cyclocross, and we certainly don't want that. But yeah, one thing, just a final remark. They can improve their product already, even with this calendar for next year, if they would change the point system. That would be very much appreciated and keep it more tense towards the end. So some free advice, if you use it, I will be sending an invoice, so I guess it's not that free, but rather some blackmailing. Good. Issam, thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody enjoyed this lengthy discussion.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was at times a yapping contest, but I think we got through, and it was interesting, hopefully, for the listeners. And yeah, it's a difficult topic, but we try to go over it quite well. So I think it is somewhat enjoyable and a fruitful discussion.
I do like these longer sessions to talk about specific topics. We should probably do a few more over the summer, see if we can keep up with our idea to record some more content. I definitely am planning to line up a number of podcast series related to cyclocross over the summer, over the road season. So yeah, that's something we're going to be working on. Issam, again, thank you so much, and we will be back next week covering the racing in Sydney class and Brussels. Goodbye.